Okay, so today we're going to look at answering a source question for the second inquiry of the Britain topic for Edexcel. The source we're going to look at is a source which focuses on the 1848 Chartist meeting on Kennington Common. And the question and the source you can see just here. So first of all, I'm going to talk you through what you need to do in terms of the process of going about this question. So if you want to pause the video first of all and just read through the question and the source itself. Okay, so once you've read the question and the source, just have a look to the left of your screen and I will talk you through the process of answering this question. So whenever you're answering a source question, there are quite a few different stages that you need to go through. Obviously, as you practice this, you'll get quicker, so the planning process will take less time, but you can expect to spend about 10 minutes of the total 45 minutes actually reading through and planning. If you spend less than 10 minutes, that's great, but you certainly should be spending at least 5. So when you're planning your answer, the first thing you need to do is look at the 2 inquiries. So in this question, the 2 inquiries that you need to look at are assessing the value of the source for, and then the first inquiry is revealing the methods used by the government to control the Chartists, and the second inquiry is the attitudes of the Chartists towards the government. So these 2 are fairly self-explanatory, but if it was a different kind of inquiry with some more difficult words in it, you might just need to think a little bit more about what you actually need to work out. The second thing you need to do is to focus on the provenance. So for this source, they've given you quite a lot of information about the provenance here. That's because you're not expected to know about Robert Gammage in this course. So they've given you a little bit more detail. Now, actually, if you've ever done any reading into Robert Gammage, you might know that he was very anti-Fergus O'Connor. So that's an interesting thing about him, but you don't need to know that to answer the source. And actually in the mark scheme, for this, it doesn't mention that, but if you know that and you can include it, that's an impressive thing to do. But what you need to do is read through the provenance and just highlight anything that you think makes the provenance more or less valuable. And the kind of words you might want to be thinking about here is the authority of the source, the weight, how credible it is, whether or not it is possible that this source could be sufficient. So you might want to link into the fact that in this source it says, in the provenance it says that Gammage attended many of the meetings of the Chartists, but it doesn't actually say that he definitely attended Kennington Common. So that might be something that you want to pick up on. Once you've done that, you want to move on to the source itself, and it's really important that you've got 2 highlighters here to help you with that. So as you go through the source, you want to highlight each bit of information that you think will be useful for answering each inquiry. So the first thing I would do here is read in that first sentence, it says various bodies continued to arrive on the common with music and banners. So I would highlight their music and banners, and I would use the colour for the second inquiry, because that tells you that the Chartists didn't feel threatened by the government. If they're turning up with banners and music, they're going for a day out, they aren't arriving with weapons, they're arriving to, have something that's political but also entertaining. Once you've read that through, then you've highlighted the parts of the source that were relevant for each inquiry. The next thing you need to do is think about which parts do you want to write about in the question, and you might want to underline those. And I would recommend choosing 3 for each of the inquiries. And this is the most difficult bit really now about the question, is that you need to make inferences from each of those. Now, you've already heard me make an inference there, because I've said that if the Chartists are arriving with music and banners, then they're probably expecting a nice day out rather than having any fear about the government's response. So that I've taken from the source and I've made an inference from it. So you then need to plan your inferences. Now, as you get more used to this, you won't need to plan it out. You can just do it in the question naturally. But I think that when you're revising, you should be practicing planning those inferences before you start writing. Then the 5th thing you need to do is just to think about, and you might want to write this down, or you might just be doing this in your head. For each of the inferences you've made, do you have evidence that you could use to support those inferences? So for example, for for the first one, where it says, I've already made an inference from it. So the fact that the Chartists arrived on the common with music and banners suggests they were there for a good day out and to hear political speeches rather than concerned about the reaction of the government. To support that, you could link to the photograph of Kennington Common, which shows that there is a large group of men all dressed in kind of their best clothes. A lot of them are wearing bowler hats or top hats, which for working class people definitely would have been their Sunday best. So you could link to that as evidence to support that. Then the final thing you need to do is just check that you think that you can make a judgment on the source question. Judgments are quite difficult in a source question because you need to think about overall how valuable the source is for each inquiry. Now, it might be that you decide that the source is highly valuable for each inquiry and it's equally valuable for both of those inquiries. And if that's the case, you just need to be able to justify it. So why is it valuable? A good thing to link to here is you might want to say it's sufficient. So it covers enough information for you to make a proper judgment on these two inquiries. Even better would be if you could say why or how the provenance makes this more credible. However, you might want to think about, could you possibly say that it's less useful or less valuable for one of the inquiries? So could you explain that the provenance of the source makes it less valuable for one of the inquiries or something like that? Okay, so what I want you to do now is pause the video, and then while it's paused, if you could go through the source, so you should have a printed out copy, you should go through the source and highlight it as we've said. If you don't have a printed out copy, you could take a screenshot of this and put it on Word and see if you can highlight over it. That could work as well. So pause your video now. Okay, so what you've got on the screen is just my version of the highlighted source. So hopefully yours looks something like this as well. So you can see for each of the inquiries, I've highlighted them at the top just so I know what I'm doing in the source itself. And then I've just put some suggestions on the side of the kind of sentence starters that you might want to use for this. So I haven't put anything for the introduction or the conclusion. I'm just focusing on the paragraphs here. So this one here is for the first paragraph. So the value of the provenance of the source. So you probably want to think about who Gammage is. You want to think about when he's writing. Bear in mind, this is after the collapse of the Chartist movement. Does that make the source more credible or less credible? You also might want to think about the fact that this is an account which is published in a history of Chartism. Therefore, it's designed to sell. Yes, it's designed to inform, but it also needs to appeal to the public. So whether that's in it, whether that's because it might reflect the views of the public, or because it may sort of resonate with them, or it may try and create some kind of drama within that, so to try and make it more saleable. It's got to have a clear argument so that people will want to buy it to hear Gammage's argument. So you could link to those ideas when you're thinking about the value of the source. For this second paragraph, I've just suggested here what I think would be some good things to link to. So you might want to link to line 5, where it says that the government has made preparations. So you might want to make an inference from this. What does that tell you about the methods used for the government if they're making preparations before a meeting? What evidence could you use to support that? And you also might want to link to line 14, where it says it's kind of like the government is bargaining with O'Connor. They're saying, okay, you can't do the procession, but you can do the meeting. As long as it's only the meeting, you're not going to experience any kind of trouble with us. So they kind of like, not collaborating, but they are sort of making a deal with O'Connor here, and that might be an interesting thing for you to pick up on. And also in line 26 and up to line 29, where it talks about the behaviour of the policemen themselves as they're blocking the bridge, you might want to think about what that tells you about the methods used by the government. And maybe as well, when you're using your evidence here, you might compare that to how different the government responded to earlier meetings. For example, the one at Newport, the one in Birmingham. Has there been any change in the way that the government respond? And then finally, for the third paragraph, which is just here, I made a few suggestions about which lines you might want to make inferences from. So the music and banners we've already discussed in a bit of detail. You might also want to link to the fact that Fergus O'Connor is placing blame on the government's overreaction. He's blaming it on people amongst the Chartist movement who have talked to an armed insurrection. I think that's really interesting to pick up on, because O'Connor's obviously distancing himself from those people. And that's interesting when you compare that to O'Connor's actions earlier in the movement. So you could definitely link to that and make inferences from there. And you could also link to line 21 to 23, where O'Connor talks about the importance of the petition. And I think what's happening here is O'Connor's saying, actually, the petition is the most important thing. That is more important than any kind of insurrection. The petition is what we're here for. And you might want to kind of draw inferences from that and link to what you know about the Chartist methods to try and explain a little bit more for the examiner. What does that reveal? How accurate is that as a reflection of what the Chartists themselves felt? So to help you a little bit with this, I'm just going to put some extra information on the screen, and you feel free to pause your video while you're doing this, and you can just kind of use this extra information to continue with the planning process. So I've got the photo there of the Chartists at Kennington Common, one of the earliest ever photos taken of a mass meeting. I'm also going to put some information here about the meeting at Kennington Common, and there's some information as well at the top about the Chartist petition itself. So you might want to pause the video here just while you continue with your planning for that essay. Okay, well done, guys.